Amy drives a car she doesn't need. Not in any practical sense. The old one worked fine. It started every morning, got her where she was going. But last spring, something shifted. She couldn't name it at the time. I still can't fully explain it now. But 3 weeks after seeing a colleague pull into the parking garage in something new, Amy was sitting across from a finance manager at a dealership she hadn't planned on visiting. He slid the paperwork across the desk. Monthly payment higher than she'd intended. Trade-in value lower than she'd hoped. But she signed anyway. And when he asked if she was sure, she said yes immediately. Because she'd been meaning to upgrade. That's what she told herself. That's what she believed. There's a kind of spending that doesn't feel like a financial decision when it's happening. It feels like a personal decision. A life decision. A completely reasonable response to a completely reasonable feeling. It moves through ordinary life without ever triggering an alarm. And it is, quietly, one of the most significant forces shaping financial outcomes in modern America. Not bad investments, not poor planning, not insufficient income. The need to look like it's going well. Walk through any suburban neighborhood on a Saturday morning. The cars are new, the landscaping is fresh, the renovation is underway. From the outside, everything signals success. But researchers who study household finances have found something that doesn't match that image. A significant portion of households with all the visible markers of prosperity are operating on margins most people would find alarming. Not because they earn too little, but because of what happens in the space between earning and keeping. Between income and wealth. Between looking successful and actually being secure. This isn't a story about people who are careless with money. This is a story about a behavioral mechanism so embedded in modern social life that most people can't see it while it's actively happening to them. And it starts not with a purchase, but with a moment. Amy is standing in her closet on a Tuesday morning. She has 2 jackets in her hands. One cost $60. The other cost $200. She's already reaching for the expensive one before she's consciously decided. It makes her feel like someone whose life is working. She doesn't think about it in those words, but her hand knows which one to choose. Later that week, she's at dinner with 3 friends. Someone suggested a new place. Casual. Inexpensive. Good reviews. Amy feels something tighten. Not dramatically, just a small resistance she's learned not to question. She counters with somewhere else. Nicer. More expensive. Harder to get a reservation. The kind of place that signals you know where to go. Nobody questions it. They agree. And the tightness releases. This is how it works. Not in big, obvious decisions. In small moments that feel completely unrelated to money. Moments that feel like taste. Like preference. Like the kind of person you are. But underneath every one of those moments, the same quiet mechanism is at work. Researchers who study social comparison behavior have found that human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to relative position. Not absolute well-being, relative position. It's not enough to have enough. The brain is wired to monitor where you stand compared to the people immediately around you. This isn't a character flaw. It's an evolutionary mechanism that never found an off switch. It just found new objects to track. Instead of monitoring status within a hunting group, it now tracks cars, kitchens, vacations, job titles, the neighborhood, the watch, the post from someone you went to college with whose life appears to be going remarkably well. And when the brain detects a perceived gap between where you are and where the people around you appear to be, it generates a low-grade discomfort. Not always dramatic, not always conscious, but persistent enough to demand a response. And spending is one of the fastest ways to quiet it. The new car doesn't just provide transportation. It closes a gap. The dinner at the nicer restaurant doesn't just provide a meal. It restores a sense of position. The expensive jacket doesn't just keep you warm. It answers a question you didn't realize you were asking. Behavioral economists have a term for the invisible audience driving these decisions. They call it the imagined observer, an audience that exists partly in the real world and partly inside your own head. And that audience is one of the most expensive relationships most Americans are in. Amy scrolls her phone at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. A friend from work posted photos from somewhere warm. Turquoise water, white sand, a drink with a small umbrella in it. Amy double taps. Keep scrolling. But something lingers. Not envy exactly, something quieter. A question she didn't ask out loud, but hears anyway. When was the last time I went somewhere like that? She opens a new tab. Starts searching flights. Portugal. Greece. Somewhere worth photographing. She didn't book anything that night. But 2 weeks later, she does. And when the trip is over, and the photos are posted, she feels it. Not happiness exactly. Relief. Brief. Real. And already fading. If you tracked Amy's spending over 12 months, a pattern would emerge. The gym she chose isn't the closest one, or the cheapest. It's where a certain kind of person goes. The coffee isn't made at home, even on weekday mornings, because there's something about being seen in the right place that registers as meaningful. The clothes are purchased slightly above budget, not extravagantly, just enough to feel current. Just enough to feel like someone who has things figured out. And none of these individual decisions feels significant. Each one, in isolation, is defensible, reasonable, but the pattern tells a different story. This is the mechanism that makes status spending so financially destructive. It doesn't feel like a pattern. It feels like a series of unrelated personal choices. Each one small enough to rationalize. Each one separated from the others by enough time that the cumulative cost never becomes fully visible. Behavioral researchers call this the aggregation problem. Human beings are remarkably poor at mentally combining many small decisions into a single coherent financial picture. We evaluate each purchase on its own terms. We ask, can I afford this? But wealth isn't built by individual affordable purchases. It's built by what remains after all the affordable purchases are made. And that remainder, in many cases, is far smaller than it should be. Not because any single choice was wrong, but because the system generating those choices was designed to prioritize something other than accumulation. Amy earned well above the median household income. She had a retirement account. She had savings. On paper, everything looked fine. But her reference group had shifted upward with every raise. And with every upward shift, the spending followed, not recklessly, not impulsively, reasonably, incrementally, invisibly. Here's the part of this story that surprises people. Status spending scales with income. The person earning $40,000 watches the person at 60. The person at 60 watches the person at 100. The person at 100 is quietly tracking someone at 200. The mechanism doesn't disappear as people earn more. It recalibrates. The baseline rises. The cars get more expensive. The neighborhoods get more exclusive. The vacations, the restaurants, the signals, all shift upward. And the financial pressure, rather than easing, quietly intensifies. Because higher income produces access to a new reference group. And a new reference group produces new gaps to close. There's a specific cognitive distortion at work inside this pattern. When we see someone who appears successful, we assume their visible signals are accurate representations of their financial reality. The car means they have money. The house means they have stability. The vacation means they have a margin. But visible signals aren't financial statements. They're performances. And the audience watching those performances is almost always performing right back. The colleague whose car triggered Amy's 3-week discomfort may be managing financial pressure she can't see. The friend whose vacation photos generated that quiet question may have financed the entire trip. The social media feed that produces a low-grade sense of inadequacy is curated by people experiencing their own low-grade sense of inadequacy. But the brain doesn't have access to any of that information. It only sees the signal. And the signal says there's a gap. And the gap demands to be closed. What makes this pattern genuinely difficult to interrupt is that status purchases do produce something real. For a while, the new car delivers a burst of satisfaction. The vacation delivers relief. The jacket delivers a sense of being the kind of person you want to be. But researchers who have studied spending satisfaction over time have found that the emotional return degrades faster than almost any other form of consumption. Not because the things purchased are bad, but because the social comparison mechanism that generated the need for the purchase recalibrates almost immediately after the need is met. The new car becomes the baseline. The vacation photos stop generating responses. The jacket becomes ordinary, and the gap reappears, slightly above where it was before. This is what transforms the pattern from a series of choices into a self-perpetuating system. The output of each cycle becomes the starting point of the next. Every signal you send eventually becomes the new floor from which the next gap is measured, from which the next purchase is justified, from which next month's financial margin quietly disappears. Amy is 41 now. The car is 2 years old. The kitchen was updated last year. She went to Portugal in the spring. The photos were well received. Her retirement account is funded. Her savings exist. And she has a feeling, when she allows herself to sit with it, that something isn't quite adding up. Not dramatically. Nothing is wrong exactly. But the financial security she imagined herself having by now feels strangely further away than it should. The numbers look fine, but the trajectory feels stuck. And she can't fully explain why. Last week, Amy walked to her car after work. She saw it immediately. 2 spaces over, something new. Electric this time. Sleek. Silent. The person inside glanced up. A small wave. Amy waved back. Got in her car. Sat for a moment before starting the engine. And she felt it. The same quiet pull that brought her to the dealership 2 years ago. The same question forming just beneath conscious thought. Not urgent. Not loud. Just persistent. The people who eventually build real wealth aren't, in most cases, people who stop wanting nice things. They're not people with unusual discipline or unusual income. They're people who, at some point, stopped using purchases to answer emotional questions. Because the question underneath every status purchase is fundamentally the same. Am I doing well enough? And no purchase can permanently answer it. The car closes the gap for a season. The kitchen satisfies for a while. The vacation delivers temporary proof. And then the question returns, slightly louder, slightly more expensive to quiet. The question survives every purchase made in response to it. That's why the next upgrade is always waiting. That's why the reference group always moves. That's why the account balance can stay relatively flat while the driveway gets progressively nicer. The system keeps running because the question never gets answered. It only gets deferred, one purchase at a time, one gap at a time, one unexamined feeling at a time. If you find yourself drawn to stories like this one, the hidden mechanisms and invisible patterns that shape financial outcomes over time, consider subscribing to Habitwealth Stories. There's more here worth noticing. Amy hasn't mentioned the new car in the parking garage to anyone, but the awareness is there. Quiet, familiar, patient. And somewhere beneath that awareness is a question she hasn't yet decided how to answer. Whether noticing the pattern is finally enough to change it, or whether the next cycle has already begun.